And there's recently a young black rapper who got out of the business, who also said he sold his soul to Baphomet and was given this power and this money and this fame. And then when he got out, he made a video to tell people about the reality that a lot of these concerts are nothing more than devil worship.
Bless the Lord, O my soul, and all that is within me, bless his holy name.
Hi. Thanks for tuning in to Armor of God again, and as always, thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us. And hopefully you'll find this video both useful and edifying. And if it's not too much of a hassle, please do share this video on your social media to help spread the message. Well then, this video isn't going to be very long, but we're going to break this into two parts. And for the second half later in this video, we're going to continue with Blessed and Catherine, because a lot of you have provided positive feedback in regards to that, and we're more than happy to continue. So now, I'd like to start this video by sharing Father Daniel Reehil when one caller asked him about perfect possession cases. And just like before, Father Reehil here brought up the classic examples of Hollywood in his answer.
It just reminded me of something I read in a book on exorcism a while back, and they were talking about the, quote, perfectly possessed. People who have assented to this completely because they're getting something out of it. And the book was like, all priests can do is run. You go in the opposite direction if you find someone like that, because you're never going to change them, and all that can happen is it's going to hurt you and not them. So, I just out of curiosity, have you ever had any experience with those, like, someone maybe trying to attack you or coming in under the guise of trying to get help, and actually just they're perfectly possessed in an attempt to damage your ministry?
No, the people that come to me want liberation. But I have been attacked, but that's the demon, not the person, acting through the person. But the idea of this, I think it's probably pretty prevalent. I know people are going to hate when I say this, but in the music industry and in Hollywood, because we know there are celebrities who have sold, literally, they think they sold their soul. You can't sell your soul because you don't own your soul. Jesus purchased that with his blood, but they think they did. I remember many years ago, Jim LaBar, before he passed, he was a famous exorcist in New York, told me a story about a Filipino young woman who was graduating Juilliard, and she made a deal with the devil with her blood. She had this, it's a long story, but anyway, she did this, and she got very famous and were very wealthy on the, it's not pop music. She was doing, like classical music, but they still, you go on a world tour, you're going to get paid well. And eventually got into drugs and is dying with AIDS, and then tells her mother, and the mother calls him, and he comes and had to help her out. But I think people do make these deals, and I think that if they're going to work towards expanding his kingdom, think about all these performers, like Katy Perry and Lady Gaga and Madonna, all of them. They really advanced the sick culture that we have today through their music and their concerts. And there's recently a young black rapper who got out of the business, who also said he sold his soul to Baphomet and was given this power and this money and this fame. And then when he got out, he made a video to tell people about the reality that a lot of these concerts are nothing more than devil worship. And when the kids think they're having like an ecstasy moment, it's actually the demons manifesting in them. So you got to be so careful now when you send your kids off to entertainment of some sort or another. Even the Taylor Swift concert looks very suspicious to me when I look at these witches' covens that she's doing on stage. If you're going to even if you're just play acting or imitating, you're getting the attention of a lot of demons if you're at that level.
As a child of the 80s, I used to think Madonna was really cool. And you look at her life and everything, it's a demonic inversion of everything holy.
Yes.
Even her name and everything is just mocking the Catholic Church. It's crazy.
And for the next clip, I'd like to share a reminder from Father Casey here. One thing that I notice whenever I listen to Father Casey, it's as though I'm listening to one of those inspirational generals in movies that give fired-up speeches to motivate the soldiers. I just love listening to him, but anyway, here it is.
Now, it has occurred to me that there are many faithful Catholics today who might feel like we are now caught in a kind of a spiritual baston. right, as our foes press on from every side. Brothers, listen. To the enemies of the cross, to the enemies of the truth, to the agents of the culture of death, to the forces of atheism, secularism, paganism, radical feminism, to the devil and all of his allies, let us answer the call to surrender our Catholic faith with a holy and righteous nuts. We're just going to say nuts. Because for men and women of faith, the outcome of this battle is never in doubt. Christ is the ultimate victor in all this, and his message is always the same: be not afraid. Pray always and never lose heart. St. Thomas Aquinas, the angelic doctor, in his commentary on the virtue of fortitude, wrote that it is far more virtuous, far more meritorious to hold out in the face of a hopeless situation, to persevere in the face of overwhelming opposition, than it is to spread the faith with great ease and success. You know where we are, right? Look around you today, what do you see? It seems as though the enemies of the church have got all the worldly power on their side. They've got the government, they've got the money, they've got the movies, they've got Hollywood, they've got the celebrities, they've got most of the media, most of the news and entertainment medias. They control the means of social communication. They've got the courts. They've got the universities. And all we have is God. And if God is for us, who can be against us? In every spiritual battle, remember, God plus one is an army.
I've been collaborating with Father Stephen and answers before, and ever since I've started the collaboration, I have also been sharing a lot of anti-abortion messages in the videos. And so I thought I'd share this one with you from Father Allen on how abortion can lead to sins against the Holy Spirit.
Another one of the sins against the Holy Spirit is to resist the known truth. Knowing the truth and still refusing to conform to it or accept it. And on this point, we can point to the humanity of the unborn child. It's a known fact. It's not a contested issue. The lie keeps being repeated by those who want to promote abortion, that it's just a blob of cells. But even now, we hear that people supporting abortion don't even bother with that excuse anymore. They know it's a kid, they know it's a child, and they say, well, the mother has the right anyway to kill, and the doctors, and it's legal, and that's the law of the land. And so there's a clear hardness of heart, which if not repented of, could lead to the unforgivable sin, become an unforgivable sin.
Let me share with you two more clips here before we get to the second half of this video. And here Father Reehil explains that if a person is possessed by the demons, that person does not go to hell. If you've watched the movie Exorcisms of Emily Rose before, I think that serves as a very good illustration in a way.
Satan and the demons operate in, you could say, two classes of ways, in the ordinary and the extraordinary, in the natural and the supernatural. So the supernatural is vexation and obsession, oppression, and possession is the deepest form. And these are when there's a supernatural effect on the person. They can change their voice. They can even turn their skull structure into that of like an animal. So very bizarre behavior. And of course, in full possession, they have possession of the body, not the soul. The person can't really do what they want to do when that happens. And as I mentioned, they kind of check out when the demon is in the first position. But being possessed does not put you in hell, because everything that person is doing, when the demon is acting is under the influence of the demon, not the person. So what you say is true. The door that opened to let the demon in could be a sin that is grave matter. But the first course of action we do with people who come to us, if they're Catholic, is take them through the sacraments, because the sacraments have the most power. And so step one would be to have the person go to confession. Somebody who's possessed, they're not possessed 24 hours a day. I mean, the demon is there 24 hours a day, but it doesn't manifest in them 24 hours a day. They have long periods of being completely aware and lucid where they can go to confession. And when they are forgiven, all those sins are gone. If they were to die in a state of possession, they would leave that body, and they would go to either purgatory or heaven. The demon, of course, doesn't go with them. They're not allowed to access to heaven. So the thing we need to worry about is the normal or the natural way they attack, which is through temptation. And that is what can get you in hell. If you commit sins that are of grave matter, and and you don't have the forgiveness from God at the point of death, that would be a terrible plight.
Now please allow me to share one more from Father Casey here, before we get to the second half of this video.
And guys, don't get the idea that all this talk about being a soldier for Christ is just for men. A guy thing, macho thing. No, it is for everyone. In fact, when it comes to the spiritual warfare, very often women are not the weaker sex. I found that out from my own mother. Very often it is the women who have got to drag the guys up to the front, right?
So now for the second half of this video, we're going to continue with the visions of Blessed Anne Catherine. And we're still in the events that took place in the book of Genesis. And it is in Genesis 11 that we learn about what is considered to be the very first skyscraper ever built, or at least attempted to be built.
The building of the Tower of Babel was the work of pride. The builders aimed at constructing something according to their own ideas, and thus resist the guidance of God. When the children of Noah had become very numerous, the proudest and most experienced among them met to resolve upon the execution of some work so great and so strong as to be the wonder of all ages to come, and cause the builders to be spoken of as the most skillful, the most powerful of men. They thought not of God, they sought only their own glory. Had it been otherwise, as I was distinctly told, God would have allowed their undertaking to succeed. The children of Shem took no active part in the work. They dwelt in a level country where palm trees and similar choice fruit grow. They were, however, obliged to contribute something toward the building, for they did not dwell so far distant at that period as they did later. The Tower of Babel was built upon rising ground, about 2 leagues in circumference, around which lay an extensive plain covered with fields, gardens, and trees. To the foundations of the tower, that is up to its first story, 25 very broad stone walks led from all sides of the plain. 25 tribes were engaged in the building, and each tribe had its own road to the tower. Off in the distance, where these roads began, each tribe had its own particular city, that in time of danger or attack they might flee to the tower for shelter. The tower was intended likewise to serve as a temple for their idolatrous worship. The stone roads were, where they took their rise in the plain, tolerably far apart. But around the tower they lay so close that the intervening spaces were not greater than the breadth of a wide street. Before reaching the tower, they were connected by cross arches, and between every two there opened a gateway about 10 feet wide into its base. When these gently inclined roads had reached a certain height, they were pierced by single arcades. Near the tower the arcades were double, one above the other, so that through them one could make the circuit of the building even around the lowest part under all the roads. Above the arches that connected the inclined roads were walks or streets, running horizontally around the tower. Those gently rising roads extended like the roots of a tree. They were designed in part as supporting counterpillars to strengthen the foundation of the immense building, and partly as roads for the conveyance from all points of building materials and other loads to the first story of the tower. Between these extended bases were encampments upon substructures of stone. In many places, the tops of the tents rose above the roads that ran through them. From every encampment, steps cut in the walls led up to the walks. One could go all around the tower, through the encampments and arches, and under the stone roads. Besides the occupants of the encampments, there were others who lived in the vaults and spaces on either side of the stone roads. In and around the whole building swarmed innumerable living beings. It was like a huge ant-hill. Countless elephants, asses, and camels toiled up and down the roads with their heavy burdens. Although these burdens were far broader than the animals themselves, yet several could, with ease, pass one another on the roads. On them were halting places for feeding and unloading the animals, also tents on the level spaces and even factories. I saw animals without a guide bearing their burdens up and down. The gateways in the basement of the tower led into a labyrinth of halls, passages, and chambers. From this lower part of the tower, one could mount by steps cut out on all sides. The interior at this point consisted of cellars, immense and secure, covered chambers, and passages. The building was begun on all sides at once. All tended to one central point, where at first stood a large encampment. They used tiles, also immense hewed stones, which they hauled to the site. The surface of the walks was quite white, and it glistened in the sun. At a distance, the sight it presented was wonderful. The tower was planned most skillfully. I was told that it would have been finished and would now be standing as a magnificent monument of human skill had it been erected to the honor of God. But the builders thought not of God. Their work was the offspring of presumption. The names of those that had contributed to the grandeur and magnificence of the building were inscribed with words of praise in the vaults and on the pillars, in the former by means of different colored stones, and on the latter in large characters. There were no kings, but only the heads of the different families, and they ruled according to common counsel. The stones employed in the building were skillfully wrought. They fitted into one another, held one another together. There were no raised figures on the building, but many parts of it were inlaid with colored stones, and here and there were figures hewn in niches. Canals and cisterns were constructed for water supplies. All lent a helping hand. Even the women trod the clay with their feet. The men worked with breast and arms bare, the most distinguished wearing a little cap with a button. Even in very early times, women kept the head covered. The building so increased in bulk and height that on account of the shade it cast, it was quite cold on one side, while on the other the reflection of the sun's rays made it very hot. For 30 years, the work went on. They were at the second story. They had already encircled and walled in the interior with tower-like columns, had already recorded their names and races thereon in colored stones when the confusion broke forth. I saw one sent by God, Melchizedek, going around among the leaders and the masters of the building. He called upon them to account for their conduct, and he announced to them the chastisement of God. And now began the confusion. Many who had up to this time worked on peaceably now boasted their skill and the great services they had rendered in the undertaking. They formed parties. They laid claim to certain privileges. This occasioned contradictions, animosities, and rebellion. There were at first only 2 tribes among the disaffected, and these, it was resolved, should be put down. But soon it was discovered that disunion existed among all. They struggled among themselves. They slew one another. They could no longer make themselves understood by one another, and so at last they separated and scattered over the whole earth. When in my childhood I had the vision of the building of the tower, I used to reject it because I could not understand it. I had, of course, seen nothing like it, no buildings but our farmhouses and the city of Coesfeld. More than once I thought it must be heaven, but I had the vision again and again, and always in the same way I see it still, and I have also seen how it looked in Job's time. One of the chief leaders in the tower building was Nimrod. He was afterward honored as a deity under the name of Belus. He was the founder of the race that honored Derketo and Semiramis as goddesses. He built Babylon out of the stones of the tower, and Semiramis greatly embellished it. He also laid the foundation of Nineveh, and built substructures of stones for tent dwellings. He was a great hunter and tyrant. At that period, savage animals were very numerous, and they committed fearful ravages. The hunting expeditions fitted out against them were as grand as military expeditions. They who slew these wild animals were honored as gods. Nimrod also, that is, where the door serves as an egress for the smoke as well as for the cows, drove men together and subdued them. He practiced idolatry. He was full of cruelty and witchcraft, and he had many descendants. He lived to be about 270 years old. He was of sallow complexion, and from early youth he had led a wild life. He was an instrument of the devil, and very much given to star worship. Of the numerous figures and pictures that he traced in the planets and constellations, and according to which he prophesied concerning the different nations and countries, he sought to reproduce representations which he set up as gods. The Egyptians owe their sphinx to him, as also their many-armed and many-headed idols. For 70 years, Nimrod busied himself with the histories of these idols, with ceremonial details relative to their worship and the sacrifices to be offered them, also with the forming of the pagan priesthood. By his diabolical wisdom and power, he had subjected the races that he led to the building of the tower. When the confusion of tongues arose, many of those tribes broke away from him, and the wildest of them followed Mizraim into Egypt. Nimrod built Babylon, subjected the country around, and laid the foundation of the Babylonian Empire. Among his numerous children were Ninus and Derketo. The last mentioned was honored as a goddess. From Derketo to Semiramis, I saw 3 generations of daughters. Derketo was a tall, powerful woman. I saw her clothed in skins with numerous straps and animals' tails hanging about her. Her head was covered by a cap made of the feathers of birds. I saw her with a great train of followers, male and female, sallying forth from the neighborhood of Babylon. She was constantly in vision or engaged in prophesying, offering sacrifice, founding cities, or roving about. She and her followers drove before them scattered tribes with their herds, prophesied on the subject of good dwelling places, piled up stones, some of which were immense, offered sacrifice, and practiced all kinds of wickedness. She drew all to herself. She was sometimes here, sometimes there. She was everywhere honored. She had in her old age a daughter who played a part similar to her own. I saw this vision in a plain by which was signified the origin of the abomination. Lastly, I saw Derketo as a frightful old woman in a city by the sea. She was again carrying on her sorcery by the seashore. She was in a state of diabolical ecstasy, and she was proclaiming to her people that she must die for them, give her life for them. She told them that she could remain with them no longer, but that she would be transformed into a fish, and as such be always near them. She gave directions for the worship to be paid her, and in presence of the assembled multitude, plunged into the sea. Soon after, a fish arose above the waves, and the people saluted it with sacrifices and abominations of all kinds. Their divinations were full of mysteries, signs, etc., connected with water. Through Derketo's instrumentality, an entire system of idolatry arose. After Derketo, I saw another woman, the daughter of Derketo. This was still in Nimrod's time, for they belonged to the same age. I saw this daughter leading a life even wilder and more violent than her mother's had been. She was engaged most of her time in hunting, attended by crowds of followers. She often went to a distance of 300 miles, pursued wild animals, offered sacrifice, practiced witchcraft, and prophesied. In this way, numerous places were founded and idolatrous worship established. I saw this woman fall into the sea while struggling with a hippopotamus. Her daughter Semiramis I saw surrounded by all the kingdoms and treasures of the world, as if the devil were showing them to her, giving them to her. I saw that Semiramis put the finishing touch to every abomination of the Babylonian race. In the earliest times, power over others was held more peaceably and was vested in many. Later on, unlimited jurisdiction was possessed by single individuals. These latter then became the leaders, the gods of their followers, and they formulated various systems of idolatrous worship, each according to his own ideas. They could also perform wonders of skill, valor, and invention, for they were full of the spirit of darkness. Thence arose whole tribes, first rulers and priests combined, later of priests alone. I have seen that in those days women of this stamp were more numerous than men. They were all in interior communication, connected with one another by feelings, thoughts, and influence. Many things narrated of them are imperfect recitals of their ecstatic or mesmeric expressions relative to themselves, their origin, their doings, uttered sometimes by themselves, at others by their devilish clairvoyance. The Jews also had many secret arts in Egypt, but Moses, the seer of God, rooted them out. Among the rabbis, however, many such things existed as points of learning. Later on, these secret arts became low, vulgar practices among wandering tribes, and they still exist in witchcraft and superstition. But they have all sprung from the same tree of corruption, from the same low kingdom of darkness. I see the visions of all that engage in such practices either just above or entirely under the earth. There is an element of the same in magnetism. Water was held specially sacred by those early idolaters. It entered into all their service. Whether divinations or ecstasies, they always began by a gazing into water. They had ponds consecrated to that purpose. After some time, their ecstatic state became habitual, and even without the aid of water, they had their evil visions. I have seen the way in which they had those visions, and it was indeed singular. The whole earth with all that it contained seemed to be once more under water, but veiled as in a dark sphere. I saw that those enchantresses beheld all that was going on, wars, nations, perils, etc., just as is done at the present day, only with this difference that the former put what they saw into effect, made good what they saw. Here was a nation to be subdued, here one to be taken by surprise, there a city to be built. Here were famous men and women, and there was the plan by which they might be outwitted. In fine, every item of their diabolical worship was seen before reduced to practice by those females. Derceto saw in vision that she should cast herself into the sea and be transformed into a fish, and what she saw she hesitated not to carry into effect. Even the abominations practiced in their worship were all mirrored in the water before they put them into execution. In the age in which Derceto's daughter lived, dikes and roads began to be constructed. She raided down into Egypt itself. Her whole life was one series of movings and hunting expeditions. Her adherents belonged to the tribe that had plundered Job in Arabia. The diabolical worship of Derceto's people became systematized first in Egypt. Here it took such hold that while the witches sat in the temples and in chambers on strange-looking seats before various kinds of mirrors, their visions, communicated while actually seen, were reported by the priests to hundreds of men who engraved them upon the stone walls of caverns. Strange that I should see all those abominable chief instruments of darkness always in unconscious communion with one another. I saw similar actions and things going on in different places among similar instruments of the evil one. The only difference among them was that which arose from the diversity of manners and customs among the several nations and the different degrees of depravity into which they had fallen. Some had not as yet sunk so deep in these abominations, and were not so far removed from the truth. Those, for instance, from whom the family of Abraham and the races of Job and the 3 kings sprang, as also the star worshippers of Chaldea, and they that had the shining star. When Jesus Christ came upon earth, when the earth was soaked with his blood, the fierce influence of such practices was considerably diminished, and witchcraft lost much of its power. Moses was a seer from his cradle, but he was according to God, and he always practiced what he saw. Derceto, her daughter, and her granddaughter Semiramis lived to be very old, according to the general age of that time. They were tall, powerful, mighty, such as would almost frighten us in our day. They were inconceivably bold, fierce, shameless, and they carried out with astonishing assurance whatever the evil one had shown them in vision. They felt their own power, they thought themselves divinities. It is touching to see how the holy patriarchs, although they had frequent revelations from God, had nevertheless to suffer and to struggle unremittingly in order to keep clear of the abominations that surrounded them. And again, is it affecting to remember in what secret, what painful ways salvation at last came upon earth, while all went well with demonolatry, while all things were made to subserve its interests. When I saw all this, the immense influence exercised by those goddesses and the high worship they received over all the earth, and on the other side, when I contemplated Mary's little band, with whose symbolical picture in the cloud of Elias the philosophers of Cyprus sought to couple their lying abominations, when I saw Jesus, the fulfillment of all promises, poor and patient, standing before them, teaching, and afterward going to meet his cross, that made me inexpressibly sad. But after all, this is the history of the truth, and the light ever shining in the darkness, and the darkness not comprehending it. And so it has been, and so it is still, the same old story, even down to our own day. But the mercy of God is infinite. I have seen that at the time of the flood, many, very many, were saved from eternal punishment. Fright and anguish converted them to God. They went to purgatory, and Jesus freed them on his descent into hell. Numbers of trees escaped being uprooted by the waters of the flood. I saw them thriving again, but most of them were covered, choked up by mud.
Well, we really hope you've enjoyed that and have learned something from it. And now, before we get to the end of this video, I'd like to share this one from Father Daniel Reehil again.
I had a lady who wanted me to pray with her yesterday. Little did I know she was fully possessed until we started praying. And that turned into a wild situation. It just got to the point where I couldn't really get her back. Like the demon would not, when they take possession, the person checks out and they literally let their eyes roll back in their head and they have no concept of what's happening. And when it's over and they come back, they don't remember anything that happened. But I couldn't get her to come back. And I'm like, it's been 2 hours. We got to stop. I can't do this all day. But finally, we got her out of the office and into the church. That's the other thing. I didn't realize that was going to happen. Normally, I would be in the church if I knew that was going to happen, but didn't have any idea. I was just asking her a few questions. Very interesting. And to think, she has a job. She can work, and she does work, and probably nobody that works with her knows that that's going on inside her.
Anyway, that will be all for the video this time. And as always, thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us. And hopefully all of you have learned a lot from this video. Remember, if there's any feedback or suggestion, please let me know in the comments below. And if you like our works and you'd like to support us, I left a link to our PayPal donation in the description box below. And from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much for your continuous support, contributions, and prayers. And until the next one, thanks again for watching, and may God bless you.